In the shadows of the 1960s and 1970s, General Motors unleashed some of the most terrifying machines ever to roam American roads. These were not just cars, they were beasts of steel and fire, built with engines so powerful they shook the ground and left destruction in their wake. Too fast for their time, too brutal for ordinary drivers, and feared by competitors. These GM muscle cars became legends of raw power. Even today, their roar still echoes like a warning from a darker age of motoring. Prepare yourself for the 13 most powerful GM muscle cars ever produced, monsters that were born to dominate. Stick around till the end, and don't forget to subscribe.
The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6 is not just another car from the muscle era. It is the beating heart of everything Detroit once stood for, the apex predator of the horsepower wars, and the single most fearsome street machine General Motors ever unleashed upon the public. To understand its impact, you have to picture America in 1970, a time when manufacturers were locked in an arms race to build faster, louder, and more powerful cars before the regulators, the insurance companies, and the oil crisis would slam the door shut. The Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was Chevrolet's way of saying, if this is the end of the line, we're going out with a bang so loud the world will never forget it. And they did, because this car is remembered not just as the ultimate GM muscle car, but as one of the most dangerous and exhilarating machines to ever roll off a production line. Beneath the cowl induction hood, where twin stripes dared challengers to test their luck, lay a monster, the LS6 454 cubic inch big block V8. On paper, Chevrolet listed it at 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, numbers that, even in print, were staggering for a street car. But insiders and owners knew better. Those figures were conservative, sandbagged intentionally so as not to terrify insurance companies or invite the wrath of federal regulators. In truth, the LS6 made closer to 500 horsepower, with dyno sheets from the era proving it had the lungs of a race engine in a factory shell. This was not just a big motor in a family coupe. This was a street-legal drag car that came with a warranty and a license plate. When you turned the key, the Chevelle didn't simply start. It came alive with a guttural roar that sent vibrations through the ground. The exhaust crackled and snarled like a thunderstorm rolling across an empty prairie. The idle was lumpy, uneven, and intimidating, daring you to press the accelerator. And when you did, the world changed. The rear tires screamed in protest, clouds of white smoke billowed into the sky, and the car launched forward with such violence that drivers often admitted it scared them the first time they floored it. Bone stock on skinny bias ply tires, it could run mid-13s in the quarter mile, but with a set of slicks and a fearless driver, it could dip into the 12s, supercar territory for 1970. Few things on the road could touch it, and fewer still could survive the humiliation of being beaten by a family coupe that carried groceries as easily as it carried the crown of king of the street. Styling only added to its legend. The 1970 Chevelle SS had perfect proportions. The wide stance, the Coke bottle curves, the bold grille, and those unmistakable stripes down the hood and trunk. The cowl induction hood wasn't just for show. It opened at full throttle, gulping fresh air to feed the beast beneath. To the casual eye, it was beautiful, muscular without being over the top. But to anyone who knew cars, it was a warning sign. An SS 454 with the LS6 package was not to be trifled with. Parked at the curb, it looked like a coiled spring, ready to explode. Driving down Main Street, it was the car everyone turned to watch, the one that made Mustangs and Chargers hesitate before lining up. Owners tell stories about their LS6 Chevelles that sound more like war stories than car anecdotes. One man recalled the first night he drove his home from the dealership. He pulled up at a stoplight, the car idling with that deep, uneven rumble, when a Corvette slid up beside him. The driver smirked, revving confidently, expecting an easy win. When the light went green, the Chevelle unleashed hell. The rear end squatted, tires spun into smoke, and the car rocketed forward like a missile. By the time the Corvette caught its breath, the SS-454 was 2 lengths ahead and climbing. "I didn't just beat him," the owner said years later. "I destroyed him. That night I knew I had the baddest car in town." Another owner said simply, "The LS6 wasn't a car you drove. It was a car you survived." And that was part of its appeal. The LS6 Chevelle was raw, violent, and utterly without compromise. It wasn't concerned with comfort, or with cornering finesse, or with anything but power. It was a hammer when the world asked for a scalpel. It was America at its most audacious, a middle finger to restraint, and a celebration of excess. The Chevelle's SS-454 LS6 was, in every sense, too much, and that was exactly why people loved it. But 1970 was the perfect storm, and the timing of the LS6 made it even more legendary. By 1971, compression ratios were lowered, emissions regulations tightened, and insurance premiums skyrocketed. The horsepower wars were over, the golden era closing before everyone realized it was gone. That makes the LS6 Chevelle not just a car, but a monument, the last greatest expression of unrestricted American muscle before the curtain fell. Today, surviving LS6 Chevelles are treated like crown jewels. Collectors pay staggering sums for them, and restorers treat every nut and bolt with reverence. But for those who were there, who bought one new, who felt that tidal wave of torque surge through the chassis as they blasted down the quarter mile, no auction price could ever capture what it meant. It wasn't just a machine. It was freedom, rebellion, and dominance in physical form. It was the ultimate bragging right, the king of the boulevard, the terror of the drag strip, the car that made grown men sweat and teenagers dream. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS-454 LS6 is quite simply the ultimate definition of American muscle. It was loud, it was brash, it was unstoppable. It wasn't just a car of its time, it was the moment when the muscle car era reached its peak, burned brightest, and left an echo that has lasted for more than half a century. To drive an LS6 was to taste unfiltered power, to feel invincible, to ride the storm. And that is why even today it is remembered as the King. Would you like me to make it even more immersive? Almost like a story told through the eyes of a young buyer in 1970, walking into a Chevrolet dealership, ordering an LS6, and experiencing the car in its first days on the street, almost like reliving the era firsthand?
The 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4 was the muscle car distilled down to pure theater and raw mechanical fury. A machine that not only demanded attention, but backed it up with a level of performance that left competitors gasping in its wake. The original GTO of 1964 is often credited with starting the muscle car revolution, but by the time 1969 rolled around, Pontiac decided it wasn't enough just to be fast. The GTO needed a flagship that was bold, brash, unapologetically loud in both presence and performance, and utterly unforgettable. That was the Judge. A car named after a running gag from Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, meant to be tongue-in-cheek, but one that instead became one of the most legendary icons of the entire muscle car era. And if the Judge itself was wild, the Ram Air 4 version was downright unhinged. At its core was Pontiac's legendary 400 cubic inch V8, equipped with high-flow cylinder heads, a radical camshaft, forged internals, free-breathing intake and exhaust manifolds, and a functional hood scoop feeding cold air directly into the beast. On paper, Pontiac rated it at 370 horsepower, a number that seemed impressive but safe. In reality, those who drove it knew Pontiac was sandbagging the figures to keep insurance companies and regulators from panicking. The Ram Air 4 could spin happily past 6,000 RPM, pulling harder the higher the tack climbed, a rare trait for a big Detroit V8. In truth, it was making well north of 400 horsepower, a feral, screaming engine that felt more like a race motor than something you could buy at your local Pontiac dealership. The Judge package took the GTO and made it unmistakable. Standard equipment included bold stripes, a deck lid spoiler, and the now iconic The Judge graphics slapped proudly across the fenders. Most were painted in the outrageous carousel red, a searing orange red that looked like it belonged on a drag strip billboard rather than a suburban driveway. Combine that with its Coke bottle body lines, Endura front bumper with hidden headlights and muscular stance, and the Judge looked every bit as mean as it performed. It was not a car for someone who wanted to blend in. This was the car for the guy who wanted to roll down Main Street on a Friday night and make sure everyone in town knew exactly who had the fastest, loudest, and boldest machine around. Driving one was an event. Owners often describe the Judge Ram Air 4 as a car that demanded respect, both from others and from the driver himself. Drop the clutch at 4,000 RPM and the rear tires turned to smoke in an instant, the nose lifting high, the car rocketing forward like a slingshot. The engine's scream was accompanied by the deep bellow of the exhaust, a sound that echoed off buildings and rattled windows. One owner said, "It wasn't a car you idled around in. The Judge was always daring you to floor it, to take it up to red line, to let it scream. And when you did, it felt like the whole world blurred." But beyond the noise and spectacle, the Ram Air 4 Judge was genuinely one of the best performing muscle cars of its day. Quarter-mile times in the low 13s were achievable right off the showroom floor, making it a true street terror. With a 4-speed manual and 4.33 gears out back, it was a car that could embarrass Mopars and Fords alike, leaving nothing but burned rubber and laughter in its wake. It wasn't just show, it was serious go. In the cultural context, the Judge represents Pontiac at its most daring. This was John DeLorean's Pontiac, the division that was willing to take risks, to break rules, to give young buyers exactly what they wanted while thumbing its nose at corporate conservatism. The Judge was both a marketing stunt and a legitimate performance package, a car that said muscle could be fun, irreverent, and wild without sacrificing speed. Today, the 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4 stands as one of the most desirable muscle cars ever built. Its rarity, outrageous styling, and ferocious performance make it a crown jewel in any collection. For enthusiasts, it is remembered not just as a car, but as a symbol of an era when Detroit was unafraid to go too far. The Judge Ram Air 4 was the muscle car turned up to 11, loud, fast, flamboyant, and unstoppable. It didn't just join the muscle car wars, it walked into the courtroom, slammed its gavel on the bench, and declared itself the law. Would you like me to expand this into an even longer, more dramatic story, imagining what it felt like for a young driver in 1969 to walk into a Pontiac dealership, order a carousel red Judge with the Ram Air 4, and then shock his entire town with it on Saturday night?
The 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W30 455 was one of those machines that proved brute strength and sophistication could exist in the same package. In an era when muscle cars were starting to feel the squeeze of emissions laws and rising insurance rates, Oldsmobile refused to go quietly. Instead, they doubled down with a car that was equal parts muscle and refinement. A beast that could tear up the quarter mile, yet still cruise smoothly down the highway with a level of polish its rivals often lacked. It was the gentleman's muscle car, a machine with a suit and tie over a set of brass knuckles. At its heart was the legendary 455 cubic inch V8, tuned in W30 form to unleash devastating amounts of low-end grunt. Officially rated at 370 horsepower, the numbers didn't tell the full story. What really defined the W30 wasn't peak horsepower, but torque. Over 500 pounds-feet of it, available almost right off idle. This wasn't a car that needed to be revved to the moon to deliver. It moved like a freight train, unstoppable and unrelenting, snapping heads back against headrests with the slightest twitch of your right foot. The W30 was the kind of car you could drive calmly at 30 miles per hour, and with a squeeze of the throttle, find yourself shredding tires and leaving a wall of smoke behind.
The engineering behind the W30 package set it apart. Special heads, a hotter cam, an aluminum intake manifold, a functional cold air induction system with twin snorkels feeding through the fiberglass hood scoops. All of it made the 442 more than just another big block bruiser. Oldsmobile had always been a bit different from its GM cousins. Where Chevy's Aveo SS and Pontiac's GTO went for flash and brashness, Olds gave you a sense of controlled aggression, a muscle car that felt like it had been engineered by someone who cared more than just drag times. Owners often described the W30 as civilized savagery, a car that could dominate a stoplight showdown and then carry you home in comfort without rattling your fillings loose. Visually, the 442 W30 of 1971 was just as commanding as its performance. The body carried bold yet elegant lines, muscular but not cartoonish, with its twin hood scoops hinting at the firepower below. The W30 package added special badging, red inner fender liners, and optional stripes that made the car stand out without ever looking garish. It was a car that looked as though it belonged both in a suburban driveway and lined up at the drag strip, ready to humiliate anything that dared pull up beside it. And that was exactly what it did. Period tests recorded quarter-mile times in the low 14s, sometimes dipping into the high 13s with the right driver and gearing. But numbers only told part of the story. The real magic of the W30 was how effortless it all felt. One contemporary owner recalled, "It didn't matter if you were carrying 4 friends and a trunk full of luggage, that car pulled like a locomotive. You could pass anything, anywhere, anytime, with just a nudge of the gas." Unlike some muscle cars that demanded wrestling to keep them in line, the 442 inspired confidence, its power delivery matched by Oldsmobile's attention to handling, braking, and overall balance. Perhaps most remarkable was how the 442 W30 managed to embody muscle car excess while still feeling reliable. Where many of its rivals were temperamental, overheating in traffic or fouling plugs with aggressive cams, the Olds just kept running. It was the muscle car you could daily drive, if you could afford the gas, and that made it all the more beloved by those lucky enough to own one. Today, the 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W30 455 is remembered as one of the last great muscle machines before regulations and insurance began to choke the era's fire. It represents a high point of Oldsmobile engineering, when they built a car that was not only brutally fast, but also refined enough to stand apart from the crowd. Collectors prize them for their rarity, performance, and presence, but enthusiasts remember them for what they delivered. The thrill of torque that felt endless, the joy of smoking the hides with a mere touch of the pedal, and the confidence of knowing you were behind the wheel of something truly special. The 442 W30 was more than just another muscle car. It was proof that raw power didn't have to come at the expense of civility. A street predator wrapped in sophistication. A car that could scare your rivals while keeping you comfortable. In short, it was the last word in Oldsmobile performance, and to many, the perfect balance of brawn and brains in the golden age of American muscle. Do you want me to expand this even more by painting a vivid scene? Say, imagining a young driver in 1971 ordering a W30, cruising Main Street and showing everyone that Oldsmobile wasn't just for middle-aged dads, but could also be the king of the stoplight drag?
The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 455 wasn't just another muscle car. It was one of those rare machines that completely flipped expectations upside down. A car that embodied everything glorious and contradictory about the muscle car era. By 1970, people thought they had Buick figured out. It was the brand for bankers, lawyers, or well-to-do grandparents who wanted smooth rides, quiet interiors, and understated luxury. Buicks were respectable, reliable, and elegant, but never wild. If you wanted raw power, you went to Chevrolet, Pontiac, or Dodge. If you wanted refinement, you went to Buick. And then, out of nowhere, Buick dropped a bombshell. A car that didn't just join the muscle car war, but came charging into the battlefield with a war club big enough to scare even the Hemi Mopars and LS6 Chevelles. That car was the GSX Stage 1, and it remains one of the greatest surprises Detroit ever pulled off. The heart of this beast was the Stage 1 455 cubic inch V8, an engine that was deceptively underrated at 360 horsepower. Everyone in 1970 knew automakers were playing games with horsepower numbers to sneak under insurance radars, but Buick took understatement to a whole new level. Dyno tests back then showed the Stage 1 was easily putting out 410, 420 horsepower. And the torque figure was the real headline: 510 pound-feet at just 2,800 RPM. Let that sink in. Over 500 pound-feet of torque in a factory car. That was more than the Chevelle LS6, more than most Hemis, and more than any street car had any right to deliver. Torque is what moves you, what pins you to the seat, what makes your knuckles whiten as the world outside blurs, and the GSX Stage 1 had it in spades. Owners often described it as driving a freight train with a velvet interior. You didn't just accelerate in a GSX, you surged forward, propelled by a tidal wave of grunt that seemed to have no end. But the GSX wasn't just about what was under the hood. Buick knew that if they were going to shock the world, they had to make the car impossible to ignore. And that's why it came in only two colors: Apollo White or Saturn Yellow, both with huge black striping, hood scoops, and a giant rear spoiler. It was Buick's equivalent of walking into a quiet boardroom in a neon suit and slamming a bottle of whiskey on the table. Nobody expected it, and that was exactly the point. The GSX looked loud, brash, and unapologetic. It was a Buick that practically shouted, "Yeah, I'm faster than you. Want to find out?" But inside, it was still pure Buick. Comfortable seats, real instrumentation, solid fit and finish, things you didn't always get in the stripped-down muscle cars built by Dodge or Plymouth. The GSX was the perfect paradox. Outrageous on the outside, vicious under the hood, but refined and composed once you were behind the wheel. That dual personality made it special. It wasn't just a Saturday night drag car. It was something you could daily drive, something you could take your family across the country in without feeling beaten up by noise and rough suspension. Buick built it for the guy who wanted to dominate the quarter mile, but still enjoy a long highway cruise in comfort. And it dominated, it did. In road tests, the GSX Stage 1 consistently ran the quarter mile in the low 13-second range, with trap speeds well over 100 miles per hour. That was Corvette, Cobra, and Hemi territory. Motor Trend tested one and called it the quickest American production car of the year. Think about that. In 1970, the peak year of the muscle car era, with everyone building insane big blocks, the fastest of them all wasn't a Dodge, or a Plymouth, or a Chevy. It was a Buick. Owners loved rubbing that in. Imagine lining up at a stoplight in 1970, a guy in a bright yellow Buick pulling next to you. If you were in a Camaro, Mustang, or Roadrunner, you'd probably laugh. Then the light turned green, and suddenly you were staring at the taillights of a Buick disappearing into the distance. One owner once recalled, "Nobody believed me when I told them my Buick could beat their car, but all it took was one run. After that, they stopped laughing." Another said, "It wasn't the noise that scared you, it was the way the torque just shoved you back. You didn't ease into speed, you were just there, instantly." Production numbers were tiny, which only makes the GSX more legendary today. Just 678 were built in 1970, and fewer than 200 came with the Stage 1 engine. That makes them unicorns in the collector world, cars that command jaw-dropping prices whenever they appear at auction. But more than rarity, it's the mystique of the car that makes it special. It was proof that Buick could go toe-to-toe with anyone, and for one brief shining moment, the Gentleman's brand built the nastiest, quickest muscle car in America. Looking back, the 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 455 feels like a perfect snapshot of the muscle car golden age, an era when automakers were willing to build wild, audacious machines just because they could. It was raw and refined, ridiculous and logical, a bright yellow contradiction that somehow worked perfectly. Even today, over 50 years later, the GSX has an aura about it. You don't just see one, you feel it. It carries the weight of a brand that refused to be underestimated, and it reminds everyone that sometimes the quietest names are the ones that hit the hardest.
The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1 427 wasn't just a muscle car, it was an almost mythical beast that blurred the line between factory production car and full-on race car. In a year when Detroit was churning out more pony cars than ever, Chevy quietly introduced the ZL1 as a secret weapon, a car that looked ordinary on the surface but had the soul of a dragster pulsing under the hood. To the casual observer, it might have appeared as just another SS396 Camaro, with familiar Coke bottle lines, simple fender flares, and a hood that hinted at performance. But to anyone who knew engines, to anyone who understood what the Central Office Production Order (COPO) program meant, this car was the definition of automotive excess, a street-legal, factory-built missile designed to embarrass everything in its path. The centerpiece of this beast was the all-aluminum 427 V8, the ZL1 engine. Chevrolet officially rated it at 430 horsepower, a number that was, by all accounts, laughably conservative. In truth, this engine produced close to 500 horsepower and delivered over 460 pound-feet of torque at low RPM, meaning it didn't need to scream to scare you. It shoved you forward with the relentless force of a freight train. The engine itself was a marvel of engineering. Every component built for high RPM abuse. Heads and block machined from aluminum to save weight, high-flow intake and exhaust systems, and a camshaft tuned for ultimate performance. In a lightweight Camaro shell, this meant the car could run low 13-second quarter miles bone stock and, with minor tweaks or a race-prepped setup, the high 11s. In 1969, this was territory usually reserved for purpose-built dragsters. Yet the ZL1 was a car you could legally buy from a dealership and drive on the street. But this extreme performance came at a price, literally and figuratively. The ZL1 engine alone cost nearly $4,000, almost the same as a fully loaded base Camaro. Factor in the rest of the car, and you were looking at close to double the cost of a typical SS396. The result was a machine that few could afford and even fewer understood. Most buyers gravitated toward more conventional Camaros or cheaper muscle cars. Only a handful of visionary racers and collectors recognized the ZL1 for what it truly was, a race car hiding in plain sight. Chevrolet produced just 69 of these cars in 1969, each one an almost hand-built, street-ready demon. Those who drove one often described an almost visceral reaction. The car didn't just accelerate, it lunged. Even at a stoplight, the engine's idle had an angry growl, and one foot on the gas pedal transformed the Camaro into a full-throttle predator. There were no compromises. The suspension was stiff, the brakes needed respect, and the steering was raw, precise, and unforgiving. It demanded attention, demanded skill, and rewarded the brave with performance few could match. One contemporary racer said, "It didn't feel like a car. It felt like a weapon, like something the engineers built for one purpose and one purpose only, to dominate." Adding to its mystique was the irony that in 1969, almost nobody outside Chevrolet and a few dealers even realized how rare and extreme the ZL1 was. Unlike the flashy COPO 427 cars, these ZL1 Camaros were built to race and then disappear into the streets, almost as if Chevrolet wanted to hide the fact that it had created one of the most insane muscle cars of the decade. Dealers were reluctant to sell them. Insurance companies were terrified of the performance claims. Few buyers knew what they had until they pressed the throttle and felt the aluminum 427's torque shove them into the seat. Over 50 years later, the ZL1 Camaro is more than just a car. It is a legend. Its rarity, its performance, and its audacious concept make it the ultimate expression of Detroit ingenuity at its wildest. Every surviving example is a crown jewel in the collector world, often fetching millions at auction.
But beyond the price, the ZL1 carries the story of an era when American manufacturers were willing to push the boundaries of what was possible, when a muscle car could be both a street-legal monster and a drag strip dominator at the same time. The 1969 Camaro ZL1 427 wasn't meant to blend in. It wasn't meant to be a daily driver, a comfortable cruiser, or a car for the faint of heart. It was built to intimidate, to dominate, and to leave an indelible mark on anyone who dared to challenge it. In a world of ordinary pony cars and predictable street machines, the ZL1 stood apart, a ghostly, almost secret supercar, a reminder that the muscle car era was as much about audacity as it was about speed. To sit behind the wheel of one in 1969 was to experience the rawest, most concentrated expression of American muscle, and to feel the legacy of a car that continues to define the limits of factory-built performance even today. If you want, I can take this even further, crafting a fully immersive narrative scene of a young 1969 Camaro ZL1 owner picking up his car from the dealer, rolling down Main Street, and leaving a trail of jaws dropping and tires smoking behind him, bringing the legend vividly to life. Do you want me to do that?
The 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am SD 455 wasn't just a car. It was an audacious declaration that muscle would not be tamed, even as the world around it sought to strangle it. By 1973, the muscle car era was gasping under the weight of new federal emissions regulations, insurance penalties for high-performance vehicles, and a growing public sentiment that raw speed was dangerous. Engines that once roared with unchecked authority were suddenly choked with smog controls and lowered compression, leaving enthusiasts frustrated and searching for the last true bursts of unbridled power. Into this suffocating environment, Pontiac quietly unleashed the SD 455, a car that almost defied belief, a street-legal beast with the soul of a drag racer tucked beneath the hood. It was a car for those who refused to compromise, a statement that Detroit engineers could still produce fire when everyone else was handing out extinguishers. Under the hood, the SD 455 engine was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Officially rated at 310 horsepower, the numbers were deliberately understated, a smokescreen to satisfy regulators and insurance companies. In reality, anyone in the know recognized that this engine was producing closer to 370 horsepower, and more importantly, a gut-wrenching 510 pound-feet of torque. That torque wasn't just a number, it was a visceral, spine-tingling force that launched the Trans Am down the street with an authority that defied expectations for a car that outwardly appeared tame. The engine itself was built like a weapon: forged crankshaft, high-strength connecting rods, reinforced block, 4-bolt mains, and a camshaft designed for instant response and sustained performance. Pontiac didn't simply make a strong engine, they created a monster capable of humiliating Camaros, Chevelles, and even the occasional Corvette while wearing a Firebird body like a discreet mask. It was a factory-built racing engine in a pony car's skin, a combination that seemed almost criminal in its audacity. Visually, the SD 455 was both aggressive and deceptive. The Trans Am's flared fenders, bold stripes, and shaker hood hinted at power, but never screamed monster to the casual observer. It could slide into a parking lot without drawing attention from the uninitiated. Yet anyone who knew muscle cars could see the subtle cues that something extraordinary lurked beneath the fiberglass. The car exuded a quiet menace, a promise of destruction to any rival who dared challenge it at the lights or on the strip. Its balance of style and stealth made it one of the era's ultimate sleeper machines, understated at first glance, terrifying once provoked. On the street, the SD 455 was a revelation. The torque came in waves, almost instantaneously, making every press of the accelerator feel like a controlled explosion. Drivers often reported that the car didn't feel like a machine, it felt like raw energy harnessed into steel and fiberglass. One contemporary owner described it as, "The moment you hit the throttle, it's like the world gets smaller and the road stretches forever in front of you. You can feel the rear tires trying to claw the asphalt, the engine vibrating with pure life, and your chest pressed into the seat by a force you didn't know a streetcar could produce." Another recalled lining up against unsuspecting challengers at local drag strips. "People would laugh when I pulled up. A 73 Firebird? They thought it was just a pretty car. Then I floored it, and suddenly I was gone. They never saw it coming." The SD455 was more than speed, it was an experience. It offered a rare combination of brutality and composure. Inside, it was a comfortable, livable pony car, with seating, dash layout, and suspension tuned enough for spirited daily driving. You could cruise to work in the morning, then hit the strip in the afternoon and unleash a force that few cars in the country could match. Pontiac's engineers had managed to balance raw performance with street usability, something few others attempted during this period when muscle was increasingly neutered. Rarity only amplified its legend. Just a few hundred SD455 Trans Ams were built, making it an instant collector's dream and an elusive trophy for enthusiasts. It was one of those cars that existed in whispers and dealer lore, a mechanical unicorn that most people would never see in person. And yet its impact on the muscle car world was immense, inspiring admiration, envy, and outright disbelief in anyone who had the misfortune or thrill of facing one on the road or strip. The 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am SD455 represents one of the last great triumphs of the golden muscle car era, a car that defied the restrictions of the time and reminded the world that American engineers could still conjure monsters when motivated by ingenuity and ambition. It kept the flame of muscle alive when almost every other manufacturer had been forced to snuff it out. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement of defiance, a last roar before the curtain of regulation and insurance claims lowered over the era. The SD455 was bold, brutal, rare, and unforgettable. A true legend in Pontiac's lineup and a testament to what muscle could be when creativity and engineering met courage. If you like, I can even go further and craft a fully immersive scene showing a 1973 SD455 owner picking up his car from the dealer, accelerating down a tree-lined street, leaving Camaros, Chevelles, and unsuspecting competitors in the dust, with period details and the reactions of stunned onlookers, making the legend come alive as if you were there. Do you want me to do that?
The 1970 Chevrolet Corvette LT1 was not just a car, it was a revelation, a statement that raw power could be perfectly married to precision, balance, and engineering brilliance. At a time when muscle cars were judged almost entirely by cubic inches, torque numbers, and quarter-mile bravado, the LT1 turned the rules upside down. Under its long, low-slung fiberglass hood resided a 350 cubic inch small block V8, officially rated at 370 horsepower. On paper, it might have seemed modest in a year dominated by 427s, 454s, and the occasional 500-plus horsepower behemoth. But the LT1's true genius was its combination of lightweight construction, high revving efficiency, and impeccable balance. In a Corvette chassis that weighed barely more than 3,200 pounds, that modest 370 horsepower translated into terrifying real-world performance, lightning-quick acceleration, razor-sharp handling, and a driving experience that left heavier muscle cars floundering in its wake. The LT1 engine was a marvel of engineering for the era. With high-flow cylinder heads, a solid lifter camshaft, a 4-barrel Rochester carburetor, and a lightweight forged crankshaft, it was designed not just to make horsepower, but to make it in a way that could be exploited instantly. It didn't rely on brute force alone, it relied on finesse, responsiveness, and a rev-happy nature that allowed the Corvette to build speed exponentially as the torque climbed. Drivers often remarked that it wasn't just acceleration you felt, it was the sensation of controlled violence, an almost tactile surge of energy that pinned you to the seat with brutal precision. Unlike the lumbering big blocks that required momentum and weight to perform, the LT1 Corvette danced across the asphalt. The engine screaming in harmony with the tight suspension, the low center of gravity allowing corners to be approached with a confidence that few other American muscle cars could offer. Stylistically, the 1970 Corvette was already a masterpiece with its aggressive nose, sweeping fenders, and wide, purposeful stance. But the LT1 added a layer of menace. Its signature cowl induction hood was not merely cosmetic, it was a functional portal for air to feed the thirsty small-block V8, hinting at the power lurking below. The wide rear tires, front spoiler, and subtle aerodynamic tweaks made it not just fast in a straight line, but planted and precise through curves. The interior, although deceptively simple, was perfectly driver-focused. The instrumentation was clear, tactile, and immediately understandable, and the seats held you firmly as the car leapt forward with startling intensity. Every detail contributed to the sense that this was not a casual cruiser. It was a machine built for enthusiasts who craved feedback, precision, and the raw thrill of acceleration. On the road, the LT1 Corvette was intoxicating. One press of the accelerator and the car seemed to explode, the rear tires digging in as torque surged, the engine's scream echoing in the cockpit. Period journalists were awed by the Corvette's ability to outperform many much larger and more heavily advertised muscle cars. Quarter-mile times in stock trim were consistently in the mid-13-second range, but what truly amazed drivers was the combination of acceleration, cornering, and braking. The LT1 could approach a bend like a European sports car, hug it with precision, and exit with torque still ready to lash out at unsuspecting competitors. Owners often recalled the joy of chasing larger cars down country backroads, watching Mustangs, Camaros, and Chevelles struggle to keep up while their Corvette floated with poise, yet attacked with sheer force whenever the throttle demanded. What truly set the LT1 apart, beyond the numbers and the balance, was the sense of engineering intelligence behind it. Chevrolet had proven that you didn't need the biggest engine to dominate. You needed the right engine in the right car with the right balance of weight, suspension, and chassis dynamics. In doing so, the LT1 Corvette became a blueprint for performance engineering, a proof of concept that raw muscle could be fused with agility and driver engagement. It was a car that demanded skill, rewarded attention, and provided an addictive thrill that lingered long after the engine was shut off. In hindsight, the 1970 Corvette LT1 occupies a unique place in the muscle car pantheon. It was not just a fast car, it was a carefully honed weapon, an elegant predator that excelled at speed, agility, and raw excitement. Its rarity, its lightweight design, and its high-revving small-block engine make it one of the most coveted Corvettes ever built, a car that is respected not just for numbers, but for the experience it delivers. Every surviving LT1 is a rolling testament to Chevrolet's ability to combine power with intelligence, aggression with balance, and brute force with finesse. This was a Corvette that could intimidate the biggest, loudest muscle cars while rewarding a skillful driver with unmatched precision. To sit behind the wheel was to feel the very essence of 1970s performance, raw, unfiltered, and thrilling. It remains, to this day, a perfect example of what American muscle could achieve when engineers refused to compromise. A small-block masterpiece that could outrun, outhandle, and outshine much larger competitors, leaving a lasting legacy as one of the most purest and most exhilarating cars of the golden muscle era. The 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge 455 HO was more than just a muscle car. It was an apex predator in Detroit's automotive jungle, a machine that roared defiantly at a time when the muscle era was beginning to feel the tightening grip of emissions restrictions, insurance headaches, and the creeping hand of federal regulations. By 1971, the landscape of high-performance cars was changing dramatically. Cars were losing compression, horsepower numbers were being dialed back, and the raw, untamed aggression of the mid-60s seemed like a fading memory. Yet Pontiac, refusing to compromise its performance heritage, engineered the 455HO, a colossal, torque-heavy V8 that transformed the already potent GTO Judge into a beast that could still dominate streets, drag strips, and the imaginations of enthusiasts everywhere. Beneath the long, assertive hood lay the 455 cubic inch high-output V8, a true masterpiece of Detroit engineering. While officially rated at 335 horsepower, those numbers barely hinted at the car's true ferocity. Torque was the real story, a staggering 480 pound-feet of it, available almost instantly, providing an almost violent shove to the rear end the moment the accelerator was pressed. Unlike smaller, high-revving engines that demanded careful ringing to extract performance, the 455HO delivered power effortlessly, brutally, and with a relentlessness that made other muscle cars of the era feel sluggish in comparison. Even with lower compression imposed by regulations, the engine retained a raw, untamed character. It could light tires, launch the car into neck-snapping acceleration, and dominate the quarter-mile with frightening authority. The Judge wasn't just about brute strength, it was a visual and psychological weapon as well. Pontiac's designers dressed this monster in the most audacious livery of the era. Vibrant color options like carousel red, lime green, and solar gold, adorned with bold stripes, the Judge decals, and a prominent rear spoiler that announced its presence long before the exhaust growl did. The cowl induction hood hinted at the power line beneath, while the Coke bottle body, flared fenders, and wide rear tires gave the car a menacing stance. To see a 455HO Judge approach at full throttle was to witness an object of pure aggression and confidence, a car that combined the visual threat of a predator with the mechanical capability to back it up, a rare harmony in an era when many muscle cars were starting to lose their edge. Driving the Judge was an experience that bordered on the cinematic. One squeeze of the throttle was all it took to feel the car's weightless surge, the rear tires desperately clawing at asphalt, while the chassis flexed just enough to communicate the force of the 455HO. Quarter-mile times in stock trim often landed in the low 13-second range, but the real thrill came from the feel, the instantaneous response, the torque that made every downshift a jolt of adrenaline, and the exhaust note that rumbled like a beast awakening. Unlike the smaller, more refined Ram Air 4, which demanded revs to deliver its full impact, the 455HO was a torquey, unrelenting monster that didn't care about revs. It simply moved, bulldozing everything in its path with effortless authority. Drivers of the era often recalled the strange mix of fear and exhilaration it inspired. You didn't just drive a Judge, you survived it. One second you were in control, the next you were pinned into the seat by a force that felt like it could tear the car from under you if you weren't careful. But the 455HO Judge wasn't just about straight-line terror. It was also about presence and legacy. It represented a defiance against a changing industry, a statement that Pontiac could still build cars that thrilled, intimidated, and dominated even as the muscle car landscape shifted under pressure. It was a car built to leave an impression at every turn, whether on the drag strip, the boulevard, or simply sitting in a parking lot. Its rarity only amplified the legend. Only a select number of these high-output Judges were built, making each one a coveted prize for collectors today and a reminder of an era when Detroit dared to push boundaries. To own a 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge 455HO was to command respect. It was the kind of car that could humble Camaros, Chevelles, and Mustangs while looking flamboyant enough to make bystanders stare in awe. It was the perfect combination of raw, tire-shredding power, aggressive styling, and visceral drama. A car that reminded the world that muscle cars didn't need to be subtle to be brilliant. The 455HO cemented the Judge's status as a legendary muscle car, a brute force, torque-heavy weapon that delivered everything a true enthusiast wanted, even as the golden age of muscle cars began its decline. This was not just a car. It was a thunderous roar of defiance, a reminder that Detroit engineers could still craft monsters capable of challenging expectations, breaking records, and thrilling drivers in a way that mere statistics could never capture. The 455 HO Judge was relentless, unforgettable, and unapologetically wild, a mechanical icon that defined the pinnacle of Pontiac's muscle car philosophy. If you like, I can take this even further, crafting a fully immersive narrative following a 1971 Judge 455 HO owner taking the car out for a full day, rolling through suburban streets, hitting the drag strip, leaving Camaros and Chevelles stunned, and capturing every detail of engine roar, tire smoke, and the sheer adrenaline of experiencing the car at full throttle, making the story as cinematic and visceral as possible. You want me to do that?
The 1966 Chevrolet Impala SS 427 L72 was nothing short of an automotive contradiction wrapped in steel and fiberglass. A family-sized sedan that could annihilate smaller muscle cars. A luxury cruiser that could leave its competition eating dust. A full-weight American Leviathan with the heart and soul of a dragster. In an era when muscle cars were often judged by displacement and badge recognition, the Impala SS L72 dared to redefine expectations. Chevrolet had long been offering the 427 cubic inch big block across multiple platforms, but when they stuffed it into a full-size Impala SS, the results were staggering. Rated at 425 horsepower, the L72 engine was not just powerful, it was a carefully engineered torrent of torque and mechanical aggression that seemed to growl through the chassis, making anyone unfortunate enough to line up beside it on the street instantly reconsider their ambitions. What made the Impala SS 427 L72 so extraordinary was the way it combined seemingly opposite traits, the comfort, composure, and interior space of a full-size sedan with the heart-stopping, tire-scorching intensity of a purpose-built muscle car. A casual glance at the Impala SS L72 would not betray its true capabilities. The car appeared elegant, almost conservative in its styling. A long hood, sweeping roofline, dual headlights, and tasteful SS badging. Yet beneath that veneer lay an engine so potent that it transformed this family car into a weapon of raw acceleration and brutal torque. Press the accelerator and the sensation was almost shocking. The rear tires clawing at asphalt, the chassis flexing ever so slightly under the sudden surge, and the driver pinned firmly into the seat as the L72 lunged forward with relentless authority. Quarter-mile times in stock form often dipped into the low 13-second range, and that was with a sedan that could seat 6 comfortably, proving that Detroit engineering could blend size, comfort, and performance in a way no one had truly expected. The driving experience of the L72 Impala SS was visceral in every sense. Unlike smaller, lighter muscle cars, which relied on high-revving engines to extract their maximum potential, the L72 427 delivered power with a torquey immediacy that made straight-line acceleration feel like an unstoppable force. Every gear change, every push of the throttle unleashed a controlled torrent of energy, and the exhaust growl alone was enough to command attention. Drivers often recounted the almost intoxicating thrill of piloting such a car, the way it responded instantly to inputs, how it felt alive under your hands, and the sense of absolute authority you had every time the tires hooked into the pavement. And yet, for all that violence under the hood, the Impala SS remained surprisingly manageable, with a suspension tuned to balance power with stability, providing a ride that was firm but not punishing, a muscle car that could also be enjoyed as a grand touring sedan. The visual presence of the Impala SS 427 L72 matched its mechanical prowess. Wide tires, bold dual headlights, a sweeping hood, and subtle SS badging made the car look confident and assertive without being garish. The long body seemed to glide along the pavement, while the muscular stance hinted at the power lurking beneath. Its design perfectly conveyed the paradox of the car, elegance and intimidation coexisting in a single cohesive package. When parked alongside a Camaro, Chevelle, or even a Corvette, the Impala SS 427 L72 commanded the same respect, proving that size alone did not determine presence, but size combined with power, torque, and aggressive engineering could achieve dominance in every scenario. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the L72 Impala SS was its role in redefining what a muscle car could be. It demonstrated that Detroit's engineers were not constrained by formulas or preconceptions. A family-oriented full-size sedan could be a street terror, a drag strip threat, and a jaw-dropping presence on the boulevard all at once. It challenged the notion that high performance required a lightweight chassis, proving that torque, power, and careful engineering could allow even a heavyweight sedan to excel in ways that smaller, ostensibly faster cars could not. This blend of brute force, refinement, and subtle menace is what makes the 1966 Impala SS 427 L72 so legendary in retrospect. Collectors today revere the L72 Impala SS not just for its rarity, but for the visceral, almost theatrical experience it delivers. It is a car that evokes awe even in modern contexts. The growl of its 427 big block, the explosive torque that makes every launch a spectacle, and the paradoxical combination of size, comfort, and pure muscle that few cars have ever matched. To sit behind the wheel is to command an object of power so immense, so unmistakably physical, that it borders on mythical. The Impala SS L72 was not merely a performance machine, it was a statement of ambition, confidence, and engineering mastery. It said, without words, Detroit could still create monsters capable of thrilling, intimidating, and dominating, all while carrying your family in relative comfort. In short, the 1966 Chevrolet Impala SS 427 L72 stands as one of the most extraordinary muscle cars ever produced. Its combination of size, raw power, handling refinement, and imposing presence makes it a machine that can still elicit goosebumps decades after its production. It was a car that dared to blur the line between family sedan and street terror, between elegance and aggression, between control and pure chaos. A car that, in its heyday, left the competition in awe and continues to inspire reverence today. If you want, I can take this even further and create a fully immersive cinematic narrative. Imagine following a driver in a 1966 Impala SS 427 L72 through a full day, leaving suburban streets, accelerating down open highways, spinning tires at the strip, eliciting stunned reactions from Camaros, Chevelles, and Mustangs alike, capturing every detail of the engine's growl, the suspension's flex, and the thunderous presence of a full-size muscle car in all its glory. This would make the legend feel alive in a way words alone rarely achieve. Do you want me to do that?
The 1970 Oldsmobile Hearst Olds 455 was a car that seemed to exist in a world all its own. A fusion of unbridled muscle and refined luxury that made it simultaneously a status symbol and a street predator. At a time when the muscle car wars were raging and every manufacturer was trying to outdo the other with higher horsepower and flashier designs, Oldsmobile and Hearst engineers collaborated to create something that transcended mere competition. This wasn't just a performance car, it was a statement, a rolling proclamation that power, style, and presence could coexist in perfect harmony. At the heart of this machine lay the legendary 455 Rocket V8, rated at 370 horsepower, but delivering a colossal 500 pound-feet of torque that seemed almost criminal in its abundance. The moment the accelerator was pressed, the Hearst Olds made its intentions unmistakable. It would dominate the street, overwhelm any challenger, and make a lasting impression on anyone who dared to stand in its path. The car's dual identity made it extraordinary. On the surface, the Hearst Olds presented itself as a plush, elegant Oldsmobile coupe with refined interiors, bucket seats, and a ride quality that could lull passengers into a sense of comfort and normalcy. But the 455 Rocket V8 beneath the hood ensured that this calm was deceptive. A press of the accelerator transformed the car instantly, from stately cruiser to a tire-smoking, engine-roaring juggernaut. Launching from a stoplight, the car hurled forward with a violence that belied its full-size proportions. The torque was immediate, pinning the driver into the seat, while the rear tires clawed for grip, smoke curling from beneath the fenders, a visceral reminder that this was no ordinary luxury coupe. With the choice of a 4-speed manual or the smooth yet commanding turbo-hydromatic automatic, the driver had full control over this brute force weapon, able to extract every ounce of performance at will. The Hurst Olds styling reinforced its dual nature. Bold gold stripes streaked across the hood and sides, accentuating its aggressive stance, while the Hurst badging proudly announced its pedigree. The long sculpted lines of the body exuded sophistication, but the subtle cues, the cowl induction hood, wide tires, and muscular proportions hinted at the monster hiding beneath. From every angle, it projected authority. It was a car that demanded attention without needing to shout, a rare combination of aesthetic elegance and mechanical intimidation. On the street, its presence was undeniable. A Hurst Olds parked alongside a Camaro, Chevelle, or Mustang instantly drew highs, curiosity, and a touch of apprehension from even the most confident drivers. Behind the wheel, the 455 Rocket V8 delivered an experience that bordered on the theatrical. Its power was overwhelming yet controllable, a rare balance that few muscle cars achieved. Drivers would recount the sensation of unleashing the engine on open highways or suburban streets, the car lunging forward with brutal acceleration, the rear tires scrabbling for traction, the exhaust growl resonating through the cabin like a living entity. It wasn't merely about speed. It was about the drama, the adrenaline, the thrill of commanding a car that combined refinement and ferocity in a way that felt almost alive. Even at high speeds, the suspension and chassis maintained composure, allowing the Hurst Olds to channel its immense power with precision, a testament to the engineering mastery behind its creation. The 1970 Hurst Olds 455 was also culturally significant. It represented a moment when American manufacturers dared to combine performance and luxury in ways that seemed almost reckless by modern standards. While other muscle cars were becoming increasingly specialized, the Hurst Olds offered versatility without compromise. It could carry passengers in comfort, cruise in elegance, and then, with a fling of the wrist, devastate the competition in a blur of speed, smoke, and noise. Its rarity only amplified its legend, making it a sought-after icon among collectors who recognized both its performance pedigree and its undeniable style. Even decades later, the 1970 Hurst Olds 455 remains a benchmark for what muscle cars could aspire to be. It is a vehicle that defies simple classification, blending luxury, raw power, audacious design, and pure American bravado into a single, unforgettable package. Every aspect of the car, from the monstrous torque of the 455 Rocket V8 to the striking gold-striped aesthetics, speaks of a time when automakers dared to dream big, when muscle meant not just speed, but attitude, presence, and an unshakable sense of identity. Driving it was not just about transportation, it was about experience, excitement, and command, a visceral connection to the golden era of muscle cars that few vehicles can replicate. In essence, the 1970 Oldsmobile Hurst Olds 455 was more than a car. It was a performance statement, a cultural icon, and an engineering triumph. It dared to show the world that you could combine elegance and brutality, refinement and raw aggression into one machine that left a lasting impression wherever it went. From the first press of the accelerator to the lingering echo of its exhaust down the street, the Hurst Olds was a masterpiece of American muscle, an unforgettable legend that continues to thrill enthusiasts to this day. I can also expand this further into a full cinematic day-in-the-life story. A 1970 Hurst Olds 455 tearing through quiet suburbs, blasting down highways, lighting up drag strips, leaving stunned Camaros, Chevelles, and Mustangs in its wake, capturing every detail of engine roar, tire smoke, and the sheer dominating presence of this muscle car. This would bring the Hurst Olds fully to life in narrative form. Do you want me to do that?
The 1969 Pontiac Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 was a machine that captured the very essence of late 60s muscle with a precision and audacity few cars could match. While the Trans Am and other limited editions often garnered headlines, the Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 represented the purest expression of Pontiac's performance philosophy. A car designed not merely to look fast, but to deliver unrelenting, visceral speed in a package that was lighter, sharper, and more responsive than many of its contemporaries. At the heart of this beast lay the 400 cubic inch Ram Air 4 V8, officially rated at 345 horsepower, though anyone who had the privilege of piloting one knew that on the street or strip it often exceeded those numbers, producing raw, immediate power that demanded respect. Torque, revs, and acceleration were orchestrated with a level of mechanical sophistication that made the car feel alive under your hands, a living embodiment of Detroit engineering at its peak. The Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 was more than just an engine in a chassis. It was a complete driving experience. Pontiac took a relatively light Firebird body and imbued it with the kind of power that could humiliate heavier, more celebrated muscle cars. Every launch from a stoplight felt like a controlled explosion. The engine's growl transformed into a roar as the Ram air system fed dense, cold air into the combustion chambers, producing an immediate surge of torque that pushed the car forward with a violence that was thrilling, yet oddly refined. In the quarter mile, it could easily dip into low 13-second territory, and with the right setup, drivers could feel the car almost anticipate every gear change, every turn of the steering wheel, every subtle input. It wasn't just speed, it was a symphony of mechanical aggression and engineering precision that few other cars of the era could replicate. Design-wise, the 1969 Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 struck a perfect balance between aggression and elegance. The fastback body conveyed a sense of motion even at rest, with sharply sculpted fenders and a low, purposeful stance hinting at the power lurking beneath the cowl induction hood. That hood was more than just a visual cue, it was a functional masterpiece, pulling cool, dense air directly into the engine and enhancing combustion efficiency, creating the feeling that the car itself breathed and lived for speed. Subtle details like wide tires, pronounced wheel arches, and aggressive front fascia completed the package, ensuring that the car looked every bit as capable as it was. Unlike some of the era's gaudier muscle cars, which relied on flashy stripes or graphics, the 400 Ram Air 4 projected authority through purposeful design, a quiet menace that demanded attention the moment it rolled into view. The driving experience was nothing short of intoxicating. The Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 was light and nimble compared to bigger coupes, allowing it to change direction and respond to driver inputs with almost telepathic precision. The engine delivered torque in a linear yet exhilarating fashion, making every downshift, every corner exit, and every straight-line burst a visceral thrill. Yet for all its raw aggression, the car retained balance and composure. The suspension was firm without being punishing, the steering precise, and the chassis responsive enough to make the driver feel in complete control of a machine that could otherwise easily dominate anything in its path. It was muscle that demanded respect but also rewarded skill, offering an experience that was both humbling and intoxicating. What truly set the Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 apart from other muscle cars was its place in Pontiac's performance hierarchy. It was not a limited edition gimmick. It was a driver's car engineered for people who understood muscle. In a lighter body than the GTO, it offered a combination of acceleration, handling, and throttle response that allowed it to outperform even some more celebrated competitors. It bridged the gap between raw drag strip capability and nimble street performance, giving owners the rare thrill of a muscle car that could dominate both the quarter mile and winding back roads with equal prowess. Collectors and enthusiasts today revere the 1969 Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 not just for its numbers or rarity, but for the totality of the experience it offers. The intoxicating engine growl, the visceral acceleration, the sense of mechanical life coursing through the car, and the undeniable Pontiac flair that sets it apart from every other muscle car of its era. It is a car that commands attention, respect, and admiration even decades after its debut. A living reminder of an era when muscle cars were at their purest, most aggressive, and most exhilarating. The Firebird 400 Ram Air 4 was not just a car, it was an experience, a statement, and a thrill that transformed every mile into an unforgettable performance.
The 1970 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS 454 was more than just a muscle car. It was an exercise in controlled aggression, a harmonious blend of brute force and elegance that few cars of the era could match.
While the limelight often favored Camaros, Chevelles, and Corvettes, Chevrolet quietly created a monster in the Monte Carlo SS, a personal luxury coupe that hid a ferocious heart beneath its long, flowing hood. By installing the LS5 454 big block V8, Chevy transformed what might have been dismissed as a polished boulevard cruiser into a car capable of commanding respect, fear, and admiration all at once. Rated at 360 horsepower, the LS5 was a torque-laden powerhouse, delivering an intoxicating mix of low-end shove and high RPM performance that could overwhelm nearly any competitor when unleashed. In the hands of an experienced driver, it became more than a car. It was an experience, a symphony of power, sound, and precision that left a lasting impression with every mile traveled. The Monte Carlo SS 454 was a study in duality. At a glance, it exuded sophistication, a long, sleek hood, clean roof lines, understated SS badging, and a poised stance that radiated confidence. Step inside, and the cabin wrapped occupants in comfort, with supportive bucket seats, a driver-focused cockpit, and a quiet ride that made it feel more like a luxury coupe than a weapon of raw acceleration. Yet once the throttle was engaged, all notions of gentility vanished. The 454 big block awakened with a growl that reverberated through the body, a visceral announcement of the mechanical fury contained within. Torque surged immediately, pinning passengers into their seats and sending the Monte Carlo hurtling forward with a ferocity that belied its refined exterior. Every gear change, every sweep of the accelerator, every nuance of throttle modulation reminded the driver that beneath the polished veneer lay a beast bred for performance. Performance in the Monte Carlo SS 454 was not merely about raw numbers, it was about the experience. The car moved with surprising agility for its size, thanks to careful suspension tuning and a chassis capable of channeling immense power without losing composure. On open highways, the coupe could cruise with the poise of a luxury car, yet in a straight-line sprint, it could easily compete with or surpass more famous muscle cars. Quarter-mile runs in the low 13-second range were attainable with a skilled driver, and the roar of the LS5 454 made each launch a spectacle of sound, smoke, and sheer force. Unlike smaller, twitchier muscle cars, the Monte Carlo combined this power with comfort and stability, creating an intoxicating blend of adrenaline and assurance that few vehicles could replicate. The visual design reinforced its dual identity perfectly. Long, sleek lines suggested elegance, while subtly flared fenders and the menacing cowl induction hood hinted at the performance lurking beneath. Unlike other muscle cars that relied on ostentatious graphics or oversized spoilers, the Monte Carlo SS 454 projected power with understated menace, a quiet predator that did not need to announce itself to dominate. Its proportions were perfectly balanced, the long hood serving both aesthetic and functional purposes, hinting at the large V8 beneath while creating an elongated aerodynamic silhouette. Every glance revealed a car that was poised, purposeful, and ready to remind the world that muscle could be refined without losing its edge. Driving the 1970 Monte Carlo SS 454 was an event in itself. The raw torque of the 454 V8 offered instantaneous response, while the engine's high RPM capabilities allowed spirited driving to be met with excitement and precision. The sound of the big block, deep, throaty, and commanding, was a constant reminder of the car's potency, and the feedback from the steering and suspension made every maneuver feel connected, controlled, and alive. It was a car that could dominate stoplight battles, surprise more celebrated muscle cars, and deliver an experience that was both humbling and intoxicating. Behind the wheel, every road became a stage, every acceleration a performance, and every drive an intimate engagement with one of Chevrolet's most underrated masterpieces. What truly set the Monte Carlo SS 454 apart was its ability to combine extremes without compromise. It could transport passengers in luxury and style, yet dominate the drag strip. It could glide through boulevards with sophistication, yet unleash raw, unfiltered power at a moment's notice. This versatility made it unique, a muscle car that refused to be categorized solely as a performer or a cruiser.
It was equally at home impressing a crowd of enthusiasts at a car show as it was leaving them behind at a stoplight, a rare accomplishment that cemented its status as one of the most underrated and remarkable muscle cars of the era. Even today, the 1970 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS 454 remains a benchmark for understated dominance. Collectors revere it not just for its numbers, but for its personality, its ability to combine comfort and ferocity, and the visceral thrill it provides. From the moment the key turns and the LS5 454 rumbles to life, to the sweeping acceleration down highways and the breathtaking quarter-mile bursts, it's clear that this car was designed to command attention, respect, and admiration. It is a rare muscle coupe that proves elegance and brutality are not mutually exclusive. A car that wears a suit while delivering raw American power with every press of the accelerator. The Monte Carlo SS 454 stands as a timeless reminder that muscle doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just quietly dominates, leaving jaws dropped and hearts racing in its wake. If you like, I can now take this description even further and craft a fully cinematic, immersive narrative that follows a 1970 Monte Carlo SS 454 through a full day, roaring through city streets, blasting down open highways, dominating a drag strip, and leaving stunned Camaros, Chevelles, and Mustangs in its dust, capturing every moment of sound, sensation, and sheer adrenaline in vivid detail. Do you want me to do that next?
The 1965 Pontiac Catalina 2+2 421HO is not merely a muscle car. It is a statement of American automotive audacity. A full-size coupe that redefined what a luxury car could do in an era when muscle was still carving its identity. Long before the GTO became the poster child of high-performance Pontiac, the Catalina 2+2 quietly ruled the streets and strips with a combination of brute force, technical excellence, and refined style that few cars of its time could match. Underneath its elegant, long-hooded exterior roared the legendary 421 cubic inch HO V8, officially rated at 376 horsepower, but in reality often delivering more in the hands of an experienced driver. Every rev, every downshift, every press of the accelerator was a visceral reminder that you were commanding one of the first full-size big bruisers, a car that fused luxury and raw power in a way that would influence the muscle car era for years to come. Sliding into the cockpit of the Catalina 2+2 421HO is an experience in itself. Unlike many muscle cars of the time that favored stripped-down interiors for weight savings, Pontiac treated drivers and passengers to luxury. High-quality leather bucket seats, a thoughtfully designed instrument panel, and a spacious cabin that made long cruises a pleasure. Yet, even as comfort enveloped you, a subtle tension lingered in the air. The knowledge that the 421HO engine waiting beneath the long hood could transform this serene, almost aristocratic coupe into a ferocious dragstrip contender in a matter of seconds. Pontiac achieved a delicate balance here. A car that could carry a family or a date in absolute comfort, yet unleash 376+ horsepower and massive torque at a moment's notice, propelling the full-size coupe down straightaways with breathtaking urgency. This duality, luxury married to unrelenting muscle, is what made the Catalina 2+2 so remarkable, and why it remains a forgotten gem in the annals of 1960s GM performance. The 421HO was no ordinary engine. With high-performance cams, carefully tuned carburetors, and reinforced internals, it delivered torque and horsepower in a way that few full-size cars could match. From the first rumble of the starter to the deep, throaty roar as it came alive, the engine made its presence known not just audibly, but physically. Every gear engagement, every acceleration, every quarter-mile sprint was a visceral reminder that you were commanding one of the first full-size big bruisers, a car that fused luxury and raw power in a way that would influence the muscle car era for years to come. Driving the Catalina 2+2 421HO was a dance of power and precision. Despite its size, the car responded predictably and confidently to inputs, allowing the driver to harness the monstrous V8 with skill and finesse. On the street, it could quietly intimidate competitors, and on the strip, it could annihilate lighter cars, leaving them struggling to comprehend how a luxury coupe had such ferocious capability. Visually, the Catalina 2+2 421HO was equally compelling. Its long, elegant body lines conveyed a sense of sophistication and permanence, while the subtle 2+2 badging, aggressive hood bulge, and wide stance hinted at the fury beneath. Unlike many contemporaries that relied on wild graphics or flamboyant styling cues, the Catalina exuded quiet menace, a car that could slip into a suburban driveway and appear as a dignified family car, only to reveal itself as a track-dominating powerhouse once the throttle was pressed. Its proportions were impeccable. The sweeping fenders, elongated hood, and strong rear quarter gave it a poised yet aggressive silhouette that perfectly married elegance with menace, sophistication with street credibility. Every aspect of the driving experience reinforced the Catalina 2+2 421HO's legend. The car felt alive under your hands, the engine's torque surging instantly, the chassis absorbing the power with composure, and the suspension providing just enough feedback to make every launch, every curve, every high-speed maneuver feel thrilling without fear. Launching from a stoplight, the 421HO pressed you into the seat with a force that was both exhilarating and humbling. Quarter-mile runs, often in the low 13-second range for skilled drivers, made it clear that this was no ordinary luxury coupe. It was a full-size muscle machine, capable of leaving Corvettes, Chevelles, and Camaros stunned in its wake. Even at highway speeds, the engine's growl and torque provided a sense of command and authority that few vehicles, muscle or otherwise, could replicate. The 1965 Pontiac Catalina 2+2 421HO also represents a rare moment in American automotive history when raw power and refinement could coexist without compromise. It was a car that could transport a family comfortably, carry passengers in style, and still dominate any straight-line battle or local drag race. It stood as a testament to Pontiac's engineering vision. Muscle cars need not be small, stripped down, or brash to impress. Instead, a full-size coupe could be luxurious, refined, and incredibly fast. A true gentleman's bruiser that quietly redefined expectations of performance. Today, the Catalina 2+2 421HO is a treasure among collectors, often overlooked in favor of the more famous GTO, yet quietly commanding admiration for its perfect blend of luxury, style, and devastating power. It is a car that rewards those who understand it. The thrill of acceleration, the symphony of the 421 V8, the commanding presence in any parking lot, and the knowledge that you are piloting one of Pontiac's most formidable and underrated creations. Every mile behind its wheel is a reminder that muscle in the 1960s was not just about flashy pony cars or marketing. Sometimes, it was about turning a full-sized luxury coupe into a drag-strip terror without ever shouting about it. The Catalina 2+2 421HO was, and remains, a car that defies expectations. Elegant, imposing, and terrifyingly fast. A true legend hiding in plain sight. If you want, I can now expand this into an ultra-long, cinematic, immersive story, narrating a full day with the 1965 Pontiac Catalina 2+2 421HO, from sunrise cruising through city streets, back roads, and drag strip domination, capturing every growl, tire squeal, wind rush, and adrenaline surge in vivid, almost tactile detail, making it feel like the car is alive on the page. Do you want me to do that next?